Well, when are you gonna? I know we talked before. When are you gonna start or finish the book? I know you was gonna. I mean, it sounds very interesting, and I want to
I
touch on
start
that.
I started it 10 years ago, and I said to myself when I
But
um
it's so unique the way you said you lay it out as a conspiracy and a lone gunman and lay out both sides for that. That's I've never, that's so
yeah,
unique
certainly part
style.
of it is it's written as if there were a discussion between two people, one of whom is supporting the lone gunman and one of whom is supporting a conspiracy. Um, and then I have to have a section on conspiracy theories and shooting scenarios. And I
Mm.
think I've got an approach. I've changed the approach slightly because I've written a couple of chapters and I'm always changing them. Um, and Nick Nally's touched on this today and yesterday. I might have tagged you that actually it's almost as interesting as the case itself now. How there's a kind of psychology going on. And I think it's quite well known and acknowledged that on social media, people develop personalities and characteristics that perhaps they don't have in reality. It's very easy to be aggressive. It's very easy to overreact. And you don't know if someone's being sincere or, like you were mentioning, good old Stephen Smith, who seems like a really nice guy. He does play the devil's advocate, but there's no doubt that there's a percentage of people on some of these forums who really are, and let's use the word eccentric to be polite.
Have you noticed that when I was a kid, um, in the '80s, and Geraldo and was coming out, and all that stuff, it was kind of accepted, or that Oswald did it, but others was involved. But as time has progressed, I mean, they've got everybody out there, and Ruby now not being shot. When I heard that, I was like, now I've heard it all, that Ruby was upstairs and wasn't the shooter of Oswald, and I couldn't believe when I first, when I read that, and it seems
Well,
like they just keep getting more and
yeah,
more bizarre.
I'm not really aware of what people thought in the 1980s when I started getting interested because we didn't have the internet and it wasn't, American history wasn't usually taught in English schools. We had our own history, was very much when you were younger about ancient history, Israel and ancient Egypt, the Egyptians and the pyramids. And then when you got a bit older and more adult, say 14, it was very much about British social history and the industrial and agricultural revolutions. I don't even think we even had one lesson on the American Civil War or the War of Independence with Britain, for example. So I don't think really. No one ever talked about the JFK assassination. There's one kid at school who got me interested in it, and he's now a
Let's
film expert.
start this. Good morning, everybody. I'm here with Patrick Collins, who's probably the most, I guess, well-read person I've ever come across since in the Kennedy assassination. I'll let him tell you all the books he's had. But first question I have is, how did a British man get so enthralled that this case is just dominated his whole life? I mean, just an obsession almost.
Well, there have been periods in my life when I've been very interested in it, and there have been periods when I've not touched upon it at all. Um, my initial interest when I was about 18, so as in the last year of high school, came to be because a friend had got a book about it. And I read the book and became interested in it. And I knew about JFK because my grandmother had emigrated to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to be with my aunt, her only daughter. And my grandmother was getting old and needed care. And so she went to live over in Baton Rouge. My aunt had married an American soldier in World War II in Scotland. And with my grandma coming from County Clare in Ireland, there was some connection with the Kennedy cousins, I understand. And she had written to Kennedy when he was a senator and had a couple of letters from him. And she also wrote to him when he was president. And we've got the original replies. One, I think, is handwritten from JFK, and the other two are signed. Whether or not it's really his signature. Anyway, my aunt has them, and they're in a family home in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and she says that I can have them. I'm due to go over to stay with them in March next year. So anyway, that was how it all started. And then after I'd finished university and I studied science, biological sciences, nothing to do with history or anything, I was at the local library where my parents live in Sheffield, South Yorkshire. And I picked up Best Evidence by David Lifton and Conspiracy by Anthony Summers. And that's how it all started. And I found it intriguing. And I now have over 420 books on the JFK assassination and Oswald. And it's probably about 50 more on things like the CIA, Castro, Cuba, and the history of the early 60s and the Cold War. And
So
I would
you
think
have
the
more
majority of
than
those.
Lone Gunman books?
Hey?
You have more conspiracy books than Lone Gunman books?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I was just going to say, I think about 75% at least would be pro-conspiracy. Yeah. And I must admit that, but because I had a relatively good job and I was traveling a lot in the US and around the world, so I wasn't spending money, I saved well. And come about year 2000, for some reason, I think it was probably because the internet was becoming what it was, and we had Amazon discussions evolving and Amazon book reviews. And so it was so easy to find books on the JFK case, and I had money to spend. So I started buying them as much as a hobby or as a collector of books as it was an interest in who shot JFK. I mean, you don't need to read hundreds of books to have a good understanding of the case, I would say. You could read maybe 25, 30, 40 books, and that would be more than enough, Chris, to be honest with you. But anyway, so yes, I have a huge number of books, and I would say that as my mind changed about the event in the 1990s, after seeing the movie JFK and appreciating that it was a very well made and seductive film.
So how long was you a conspiracy theorist before you started believing?
From about 1981.
Okay.
Through my postgraduate studies of the Kennedy assassination and my thesis on the assassination, where it was really a study of did the conspiracy body of work support a reasonable case for conspiracy? And my conclusion as a young man at that time was yes, that there were many books out there that made you think that there could well have been a conspiracy. I never committed to there definitely being one, but I rather suspected that there was. I never believed in the grassy knoll gunman, and I always accepted the single bullet theory.
Really?
But yeah, but I never ruled out,
okay,
a missed shot from another building or Oswald being involved with someone else. But to go back to your question about that sort of journey, I also did work for the BBC, and I did some sort of copyright. That's when you check text and narration for film companies, TV companies. And I did have a very low-level junior research position on a well-known British JFK assassination documentary in the late 1980s. But that's an awful long time ago. I think really it was only post-2000 when I started buying all these books that my real interest was rekindled. And I would say that I went from being someone who was young and a little bit naive and gullible to someone who had become, more grown up and realized that actually it could have very well been a very simple act, a very last minute act that sadly was the reality, and that Oswald pulled it off with luck a very bad luck for most of the rest of the world. But and
Was
I
there
sort
any
of
single thing that flipped the switch and said, "That's it. There's no conspiracy. He did it."
I can't remember there being sort of a eureka moment. I think probably if I did have to pinpoint it, it would be that I was aware that Oliver Stone took great liberties with his movie. And I knew from my own experience of working in the business of the conspiracy documentary area that the primary reason for making these films was not historical truth. I know that from direct experience. You know, I heard a well-known producer say when I was there in the room, this isn't about finding out the truth. This is about making good TV and making money. And you've got to bear in mind that authors are influenced by their publishers. Publishers want to sell books. Books about conspiracy sell a lot more than books about no conspiracy on the whole.
Yeah, of course. That's going to sell a lot. It's more sexier. So tell me a little bit about when you worked on The Men Who Killed Kennedy.
Well, I was I'd completed my thesis on the JFK assassination, and that was maybe 84, something like that, 1984, thereabouts. And I'd been to Dallas in 83 and 84, and I'd been to the National Archives, and I kind of like put it to rest for a while. And I got a call from my tutor who'd supervised my thesis, saying that someone had told him that there was a documentary being made at Central Television, which was in the UK Midlands area near Birmingham and Nottingham. I now live in Nottingham, although at the time I was either in Cambridge or in Yorkshire. But anyway, I phoned them up and I went to see them, and they interviewed me about my work and my postgraduate studies and the time that I'd been in Dallas and so forth. And I was due to go and stay with my family over in America. And so it sort of dovetailed nicely. I was able to go and spend time with family friends in Dallas. So I was able at that young age, I didn't have very much money, to reside there for a few months. And I was mainly involved in assisting Larry Harris, who is a local researcher, and working with Mary Ferrell, who's a well-known researcher in Dallas, Texas, both of them whom now have passed away. So I kind of drew the short straw because I never really found the tippet shooting, and I mean this with all due respect to the event, of course, I never really found it the most interesting area of the case.
I've actually got into that a lot more when I first listened to I listened to Joseph McBride on Joseph McBride, and I was just so enthralled. I'm not sure. All right, turn that off. And I was just so enthralled. I thought, oh, this is just so amazing, you know. And then I got thinking about it. I was like, wait a second, how can nobody else seen these cops, you know, shoot Tippit? And then listening to Bill Brown, I became real interested in it. But so that went my next question. I believe that everybody would be in agreement that Vincent Bugliosi book is the premier Bible of the lone gunman, and of course Gerald Posner, and a lot of people give Mark Lane a hard time. I'm not so hard on him because he's a defense lawyer, and I know that's what they do. So I get that. But of the conspiracy authors, who would you say is probably the most honest or the most credible, or the one who's not trying to sway people to believe something that's not true?
Oh, unquestionably Anthony Summers.
Even more than Mary Ferrell?
Well, Mary Ferrell didn't actually write a book.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I that's a very good question. She was, to me, and I was young, of course, and I was very taken by the fact that she'd got this huge collection of materials, and she knew so much more than I did. And she had helped Anthony Summers with his book Conspiracy in 1980, and before that probably, no doubt, along with Paul Hoke up in Berkeley, California. I thought she was very reasonable, very, at that time, my perception was that she was honest, well-meaning, and was interested in historical truth. She wasn't, sort of one of those eccentric people that believed in the Loch Ness Monster and the Roswell aliens and all that sort of stuff. And so, yes, in answer to your question, I think her work and her foundation and the website which is associated with that is authoritative and well-meaning. I just think the interpretation by so many people on what happened is very poor, to be honest with you. And I think it's very much faith-based. And I can't pretend to understand why older people than myself, I was just a baby when Kennedy was shot. I have no recollection of it at all. I can understand people of that generation feeling so affronted that they felt at the time that it couldn't possibly be just one, disenfranchised young man like Oswald, 24-year-old misfit, basically.
Yeah. How did that guy say if he put hit 6 million Jews on one side and I forgot. Yeah, the
William Manchester. Yes, that if you have a balance to the act, you had. I think that his wording was something along the lines: you put the greatest group of criminals in modern history, which is the Nazis, and 20 million Jewish people on the other side who they killed, then you have a balance. If you have just a 24-year-old Marine who nobody knew and President John F. Kennedy on the other side of the scale, there seemed to be no balance. But if it was a conspiracy, it adds weight to the other side of the scale and makes people feel like, there was some explanation, if not meaning, to it all.
Yeah, one thing about Mary Farrell, she's my go-to. If I have any question, she's the one. I go to her site and I will find it. If it's there, she will say, okay, so subtract Posner and Bugliosi. If there is one must-read Long Gunman book that someone must read besides those two, because that's all we hear about, which one would it be? And for one conspiracy theory book, which one would it be?
Well, I go for Peter Knight, The Kennedy Assassination from 2007, just about 198 pages. What he puts into that book is a phenomenal achievement, given it's so small.
Really?
Sure, yeah. It's incredible what he packs in there. And of course, it's an unusual book because it's really as much more about conspiracy thinking and why people believe in conspiracies and why people believe in the JFK conspiracy, and trying to explain how that comes to be, rather than a huge analysis of all the characters and people that are involved with it. He does talk about the event in art, media, fiction, but it's mainly about conspiracy thinking. So it's a little bit unusual in that respect, but it's very acute and smart and to the point. One of my favorites, and I thought at the time, it's amazing that he came out with this and achieved basically pretty much what Bugliosi achieved in a fraction of the number of pages. Yeah. Another really good writer, and he's another English guy, is Mel Ayton. Now, Mel Ayton has written several books on the Kennedys and the assassinations, not just JFK, but Robert Kennedy as well. And he did a more recent book with help from David Von Payne, who's the well-known amateur researcher, one of the best, if not the best, perhaps. Called, was it Beyond Reasonable Doubt? It came out in about 2013. So I'd recommend those two. Yeah. And I'd recommend Anthony Summers as the best pro-conspiracy. I also think in conspiratorial terms, Gus Russo is probably reasonable. And I really thought that Brian Littell's book, Castro's Secrets, So he's an CIA officer, and he talks in that book about the possibility that Oswald had connections in in Mexico City at the Cuban embassy, and outside, perhaps from his hotel in that general area, that he might have met people who influenced or even directed or made sort of promises to him about, maybe shooting Kennedy in the fall when he came to Dallas, where Oswald lived, or Texas, where Oswald lived.
And I believe after the conversations we've had, that if there was a conspiracy, that would be the most likely scenario.
I think so.
I was at a funeral one time, and me and you were talking, and I was out there doing something, and all my life, CIA, and you asked me a question, something about CIA, and it was something about, well, what do you have that ties would make you think that? And I thought, there's nothing I can think of that would tie the CIA and Oswald to the assassination. So